November 23rd, 1894, Jackson Asylum, close to New Orleans, Louisiana. A 32-year-old man by the name of William Salter was checked into the institution by his grandfather. Certain that his grandson had completely lost his mind, his mental health collapsed due to a sudden and severe case of insanity. Agitated and violent, William was tearing off his own clothes and showed little to no signs of intelligence. Having temporarily lost the ability to speak, he rather barked and growled at anyone who came near him, almost like a wild animal. Because of his grandson's erratic behavior, the grandfather had considered him a lost cause, a shadow of his former self. Wishing no longer to maintain a relationship with his grandson, the grandfather decided to leave William in the custody of the mental health professionals at the Jackson Asylum. Overseen by Dr. Lemonnier, and under both heavy sedation and fixation, the asylum kept William under observation for the foreseen future. Proving to be quite a problem, William was a danger to anyone who came near him. Constantly growling, he relentlessly attempted to harm the medical staff when they approached. Even when fixated, he would attempt to bite and chew off the restraints on both chairs and beds. Further inspection would reveal his pupils to be fully dilated at all times, though no substance or ailment had been administered, nor was any detected within his body. However, it would seem that during his stay at the facility, this man who was thought to have been lost to insanity and primal behavior would somehow make a miraculous recovery. Over the first 2 months, William regained the ability to speak. His mannerisms would change, revealing that beneath the aggression and violent insanity existed a well-mannered and eloquent man who spoke with clear joy in his voice. Docile, polite, and intelligent, the following month would show significant improvement to such an extent that the man was deemed fully rehabilitated, a complete 180 and full recovery, which resulted in the patient being discharged in the month of February. The successful treatment was confirmed by both Dr. Lemonnier as well as the superintendent of the facility, Dr. Hoff Jones. William returned to his home and was reunited with his family within the bayous, though this happy reunion wouldn't last for long. On the 7th of May, only 3 months after being discharged from the Jackson Asylum, William Salter would once again return to the facility, this time accompanied by the police. In a mad rage of insanity, William had attacked a woman in the streets of New Orleans. Like a rabid dog, he had bit the woman across the neck and shoulder numerous times, leaving deep wounds on her body. William was once again taken into the care of Dr. Lemonnier, who assessed that he might be suffering from a relapsing mental condition with small periods of respite. William was once again put under observation, but it would seem that his condition had worsened since his last treatment. He would now experience more frequent violent outbursts, but was also prone to blackouts, as well as conditions that would mimic that of sleepwalking, even though he was still awake, on top of a frequent loss of the ability to speak and overall aggressive behavior. Over the following days, William's condition would further deteriorate, though this time not only mentally. The medical staff of the facility discovered boils and festering sores across his entire body, the largest being the size of an apple. He would maintain a hostile and aggressive persona, lashing out at anyone who came near him, barking and growling in outbursts of anger that the nurses described as disgust rather than fear. When observed alone, William would blankly stare at the wall for hours, almost as if he was stuck in some sort of hopeless trance. But then, from one day to another, William would suddenly recover, regaining both speech, composure, manners, and intelligence. William once again gave the staff hopes of a potential recovery. His improvement showed such progress that he was scheduled for a follow-up interview with Dr. Huff. However, William would never make it to the interview. During a routine examination, William tore himself loose from his restraints and attacked Dr. Lemonnier. With tooth and nails, he bit and scratched the doctor before stabbing him in the neck, arm, and thigh with a pencil. The pencil embedded itself within the neck of the doctor before he collapsed to the ground in a pool of his own blood. Dr. Lemonnier was hospitalized in the infirmary of the asylum, where the tip of the pencil had to be surgically removed from his neck. Upon closer inspection of his wounds, a rather odd saliva of yellow hue and thick consistency was found, but that was not the most troubling part. Severe infection in both the bites and scratches caused by William had already set in. This despite the fact that it only had been mere hours since their infliction. At the same time, Lemonnier was running a high fever in response to the physical trauma. In the chaos following the attack on Dr. Lemonnier, William broke out of the cell and stumbled through the asylum. By chance, he found himself at the office of Dr. Huff Jones, the superintendent of the Jackson Asylum. Finding it empty, he decided to enter and grab what he could, taking with him as many folders and journals as he could carry before he ran out, leaving the asylum behind, once again returning to his roots in the bayous. Back in his cabin, the swarms around William cried out in the night. However, this night, the creature had returned. It wandered the swamp around the cabin, the heavy footsteps coming closer and closer and closer. William didn't dare to contemplate what it could be. Certainly not a human. Lately, the swarms had been full of screams and terrors, and if the papers he had stolen from Huff were to be believed, it could be anything out of hell itself. What had unleashed itself upon the bayous, upon Louisiana, it was death itself, corrupting the very soil around him. He shuddered at the thought. Fortunately, this creature hadn't made an attempt to enter the cabin yet. William wasn't sure of the date. Cooped up in the cabin, he had spent days, weeks, maybe even months. He wasn't sure if he was feeling better or worse. Better to be free from the asylum for certain, though something about the swarm seemed to burden him ever so terribly, as if the air was saturated with grief and misery. His mind was racing, head had been pounding for days, and now the fever had set in again. In this state of delirium, his visions came back, dreams and nightmares that plagued him throughout both night and day. He struggled to differentiate between reality and imagination. Between the blackouts, he grasped for the same recurring thought that returned to him every night, the visions always taking him back to that same place. The anguish, the screams, the iron bars. But no matter how hard he tried to remember, each fragment of shattered conscience always seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. That dark place always eluding recognition, remaining but a stranger in his distant thoughts. All he knew was that it happened before Huff, before the asylum. It was something else, something in the cell, something far more sinister. The only thing that seemed to clear his mind was walks and his work. He had read his own file from Huff's cabinet. Dysphoric mood, aggression, grandiose behavior, so many lies. How dared they? As if they had the slightest idea of who he was. They even pretended to know his family. Pretentious bastards. Huff didn't know, but while trapped in the asylum, William had orchestrated plans of his own. He knew the truth about Huff, about the bayous and its monsters, about everything. He was gonna defeat this army of the dead. He would conquer darkness. All he had to do was perfect his work. He just had to practice. He had begun on small animals, making careful incisions, surgically removing appendages, limbs, and heads. He was no doctor, not like his father, but he had determination. He just had to keep practicing. His daily walks were now not only leisure, but also a breather from work, a much-needed relief as the confinement to his cabin was slowly driving him mad. However, the pleasure he had found in walking the swamps deteriorated with each passing day. It wasn't just the fever and the sickness weighing him down. He found that the warm summer air was slowly changing around him. The swamps had started to reek, not of brackish water, but of rot. The putrid smell of decaying flesh saturated the air, as if William walked among corpses. The smell seemed to follow him everywhere. The end of our world was nearing, he was sure of it. Darkness was creeping ever so close. William grew more and more maniacal by the day. Disassociation took over as his anxiety escalated. Whatever he had once been was slowly leaving him. Fever dreams took over both night and day. He stopped leaving the cabin, not even daring to get near the door nor the windows. The nights had become... What was that? Impossible. No one knew he was out here. William cowered behind his bed, certain that whatever was out there was bound to kill him. Droplets of fever sweat ran down his forehead and into his eyes. The gun, his gun in the cupboard. He had to get his gun. He got down on the floor, making sure to stay out of sight from the windows. Slowly he crawled across the wooden floor, trying his best to stay quiet, not attracting any unwanted attention. Inching his way across the floorboards, he finally reached the cupboard. However, the second he grabbed the handle of the revolver, the knocking stopped. William listened carefully. Not a sound, no footsteps, just the subtle cries of the swamp around him. William mustered up the courage to go outside, looking for whoever might have come to his cabin. Yet, he found no evidence of anyone ever being near it. No footprints in the mud and no dirt on the porch either. William suddenly found himself questioning his own sanity. Had the doctors been right about him all along? His mind was racing. His head was about to explode. Exhaustion took over. He had to try and get some sleep. William suddenly came to his senses in the middle of the night. He looked around, confused, perplexed. It had happened again, but this time the blackout had been worse, much worse. He didn't recognize where he was, but he was certain it was deep in the swamps. As he licked his lips, he suddenly realized his mouth was full of blood, but not his own. Disgusted, he spat out a big chunk of bloody fur. It made him feel sick. The smell of iron hung in the air. Sickened, he looked down himself. His hands, shirt, and pants were stained with blood. Dazed and confused, he staggered to his feet and began stumbling in the direction he thought to be back home. Through the mud and swamp water, he trotted to the cries of the bugs around him, barely clinging on to consciousness. Requiring every bit of strength he had left in his body, it would take him until dawn before he finally reached the cabin. Worn out, exhausted, he threw himself onto his bed, collapsing in debilitating fatigue, finally receiving some much-needed rest. However, this brief moment of bliss would also be short-lived. William came to atop of a man. With a knife, he stabbed and stabbed and stabbed. Unable to control himself, the knife plunged itself into the soft tissue, tearing apart skin, flesh, and organs. William wept with every stab, tears running down his face as he was overcome with guilt and fear. The shame was unbearable, yet the sensation of power, the thrill of taking another man's life, coaxed him to keep on stabbing. Though the man was already dead, William continued to plunge the knife into his corpse. The ribcage cracked and shattered under the pressure, skin tearing apart as William mutilated the deceased over and over and over again. What was once a man, William had turned into a damp pile of flesh strips, nothing but a wet heap of crimson red matter. The smell was sickening. William looked at the consequences of his actions, certain that he was gonna go to hell. But what did it matter? He was already there. A few days later, in the light of the moon, as William was sitting in his cabin, tending to his work, he heard the sound of subtle steps on his porch. To his surprise, a visitor had shown up, an elderly woman by the name of Mary. What was she doing all the way out here? How did she find him? She seemed disoriented, nervous. William thought he knew her from somewhere, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. Pretending to be cordial and hospitable, William invited the old woman in for a cup of tea, though all he had was filthy swamp grass. As the woman sat in his living room and sipped the dark and vile liquid, it suddenly dawned on William that the woman was demented. She couldn't fight, meaning he couldn't use her as an ally in the fight against darkness, but he could learn so much from her. William quickly grabbed a rope and tied up the woman. Now was the time to work. First he had to test his knife. He had sharpened and polished it. It should be ready. And it was. The knife effortlessly cut through the woman's skin, exposing the bone beneath. William was surprised. The knife was much sharper than he had anticipated, and the woman bled profusely. He would have to consult his medical books. He couldn't let her die just yet. He still had work to do, and things he wanted to test. The bayonet dug into the joint. William wasn't sure what bled the most, the gunshot in her shin or the amputation of the leg. Mary had long since gone unconscious from the pain, yet she still moaned. William didn't have a bone saw, just a bayonet, and he had to hammer it at the flesh to amputate the leg. As the knee finally shattered and William could pull off the leg, tearing apart skin and tendons, Mary awoke in a deafening scream of agony. After he finished cauterizing the amputation, William took a break on his porch, proud of what he had achieved. He was a surgeon now, just like his father. As he looked down, he noticed the amputated leg of Mary still in his hand. Then he suddenly realized he hadn't eaten in quite a while, and what a shame it would be to waste such tender and delicious meat. Nourished and saturated, William turned his attention back to Mary. She had been unconscious for a full day now. William regretted amputating her leg. Black lines were running from the festering stump. Blood poisoning was a certainty. William himself was covered in sores as well. He was a mess. The headaches and fevers were driving him insane. Mary could have been an ally in the fight against darkness. Now she was a motionless pile of flesh on his wooden floor, moaning herself into a slow death. That very same day, William saw a man way out in the woods, sprinting through the swamps at full pace. Why? What was he doing all the way out here? And where was he going? William took to following the man, tracking him for the better part of a day. As he finally reached the banks of the bayous, the man was nowhere to be found. Upon further inspection, William found tracks from a swamp boat in the sand. and next to them were the man's boots, his jacket, and a long rifle. It was a Sparks, and attached to it was a high-powered scope, expensive, well-kept, and powerful. A beautiful weapon, a welcome gift in his fight against darkness. The Sparks kicked into William's shoulder with the force of a donkey, its heavy roar echoing out into the swamps around him. A hit, once again. Despite his sickness, he was getting sharp with his aim. The practice was paying off. The bullet had torn through Mary's brittle flesh, blowing out another large chunk of her abdomen. He had tied her to the tree not far from the cabin, and nailed her hands to the trunk as well. There wasn't much left of her anymore. The Sparks could take down an elephant after all, and with the amount of shots he had put into Mary, William estimated he could have killed at least 20 elephants by now. However, William's violent fever came back once again. He could barely stand. He had to rest. He awoke to the racket of heavy stomps and splintering of wooden timber. The creature from many nights ago had returned, now breaking its way into his living room. Headless, bloated, a true walking nightmare. However, the creature was not alone. In his living room stood two young women, or rather, girls. Weapons raised, guns, explosives, and tools strapped across the entirety of their bodies. These girls were prepared for war. The first of the girls lit a small explosive device before she tossed it out of the window. As it went off and the creature got distracted, the second girl stepped forward, wielding a sledgehammer. With inhuman force, she swung the hammer into the bloated flesh of the creature, sending the large behemoth crumpling to the ground. As it squirmed and writhed in pain, the girl stood over it, raising her hammer once again, before bringing it down with a tremendous wet thud. Terrified, gasping in panic, William couldn't believe his eyes. Quietly, almost indifferent, the girls turned from the dead creature to William, their empty stares drilling their way into his skull. His look darted from one to the other. In their endless gaze, William saw nothing but death. And finally, death spoke. "Who's the woman on the tree?" one of the girls asked, her demeanor obvious. William's heart sank. Shame, regret, fear. He began to weep. The tears washed away the mud and blood that covered his face. The girls gave each other a nod before one of them pulled out a pistol, putting it to the temple of William before she finally put an end to his miserable existence. The tale of William Salter and his maddening descent into insanity is a curious subject that leaves us with more questions than actual answers. What kind of trauma did he experience within the prison in Dessau? What kind of treatment did he undergo under the supervision of Dr. Huff Jones at the Jackson Asylum? And even more puzzling, how exactly did he manage to stay alive within the area of corruption for so many months? It would seem that once again, the answers elude us, leaving us once more with an inexplicable mystery, which might never be solved. Hey there, Hazmat here. That was the story of William Salter. If you're curious about the story yourself, I have left all of the lore entries that I've used to create the video in the description below. Have at it. As always, a big thanks goes out to the Hunters Lounge, specifically the exclusives, Gitchy Boy and Johnny Sevens, the VIPs, Corvo Bearslayer, Derivative, Doug Powell, Gino Lucero, Goose, Hambone, Jim and El Bob, Corey Peterson, I, Slip, Stas Biestek, Sunrise Phoenix, TJ Crane, Texas Toast, and the Wizard of Cobber. And of course, all the regulars. The Hunters Lounge supports me directly as a content creator, so if you enjoy what I do, consider becoming a member here on YouTube or subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. A link is in the description below. And as always, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.